The Articles of Confederation were the worst government ever made in the history of mankind. The Articles of Confederation were literally the worst. I can't think of a worse governmental structure than the Articles of Confederation. I mean, what were the Founding Fathers even smoking to come up with an idea that dumb? My dog, my actual dog, could make a better government than the Articles of Confederation. And those are things that you hear people say when talking about the Articles of Confederation. I'm not here to argue that it was a great government. I mean, we're going to look at it and try to cut the Founding Fathers some slack here, because I mean, they're basically like blind men flying in the dark, all right? Here comes the intro. See you on the other side. Alright, so this is the part in the video where I would review what happened in the last video and probably link to it here in the cards, and we'll link to something, but it won't be a video about the thing that happened last in American history, because the whole unit on the American War for Independence we just didn't do. So now we're moving into the stuff that happens after the War for Independence, and one of those things is the Articles of Confederation. But before we even get there, there's something funny that I like to think about, and that's basically like, who was in charge during the War for Independence? I mean, like, you had your Continental Congress, but at the same time, like, who are they and what are they even doing? Why are we all accepting what they say as law? And at the end of the day, what you have to realize is someone had to be in charge and someone had to lay out a plan. Well, since we were seeing this whole War with England thing all the way through to the end, be it good or bad, spoiler alert, it was good. We made it. We won. We're a country now. But anyway, since we're like taking this whole war seriously, we also got to think about what actually happens if we win. Lots of times in my classes I use the analogy of a dog chasing a car. What's the dog going to do when he catches the car? I mean, what are we going to do if we actually pull off this incredible David versus Goliath NCAA tournament 16 versus 1 upset, actually defeating the largest and most powerful empire on the face of the earth? I mean, what happens if we catch that car? Well, providentially, there were some guys who were thinking about that. And the Continental Congress decided, you know what, it'd probably be a good idea if we had a government in place for if and when we win this thing. Because remember, these guys were in it to win it, and they weren't going to cut any corners, and they weren't going to leave any stones unturned. And so John Dickinson, one of the delegates, where's he from? Let's check the book. Delaware. Okay, Delaware. Go Delaware. So John Dickinson, the delegate from Delaware, drew up the Articles of Confederation. An important thing to keep in mind as you study the Articles of Confederation is this. The Articles of Confederation were almost a reactionary government to what the colonists knew they didn't want. And what they didn't want was a tyranny overseen by somebody like George III. So pretty much every type of government that they drafted and tried to draw up had to do with the ruling power being concentrated in local governments, not by some tyrant that sat on a throne or sat in an office somewhere far away. That was their whole idea. So in order to protect the liberty and autonomy of each state involved in this war for independence, as well as the individual liberty of each and every colonial citizen, the type of government that was suggested that would be most acceptable to all people was a confederation. A confederation is a key term here, so let's define it. It's basically a loose organization or league of states. Each state would then be keeping its right and autonomy, but these autonomous states would band together to help make decisions, strengthen numbers, protect themselves against the rest of the world that might be interested in conquering them. So in 1777, during the War for Independence, the Articles of Confederation is proposed, and for about 4 years it's argued about. A lot of these states didn't want to give up things that this new government was asking them to cede over to the national government. Chief among these states was Virginia. They didn't want to give up any of their land claims in the Ohio River Valley. Remember, that's one of the reasons why we're fighting this whole war is, you know, we don't like England telling us not to be in the Ohio River Valley. It's none of their business, that's our business. And the Native Americans who live there and probably don't want any of us in there. But anyways, we're fighting a war partially over that. Once Virginia gets on board, the Articles of Confederation are officially ratified. Ratified is a fancy term that means everybody agrees on it. We sign off on this, we put it into effect. So once Virginia gets on board, it's ratified in 1781. So again, this is all still happening during the War for Independence. So now the Continental Congress is not necessarily running things, it's the Articles of Confederation. Alright, so now's the time where we geek out over the things that this new government couldn't do, and then we compare it to all the things that it couldn't do. That is when we talk about how it was the worst government ever invented. Maybe. Probably not, honestly. That's a bold claim. But it didn't last, because we're not. The first power that the Articles of Confederation gave to this new national government was to raise an army. which was important because, that's why you have a government, is to protect the people in the country. So raising an army was a key thing that this new government could do. The next thing it could do was that it could declare war. This new government could declare war on any nation that was, infringing upon our national sovereignty. So, again, another key power that is reserved for this national government. And then kind of like going along with the whole declaring war thing, this new government, the Articles of Confederation, could also make and sign treaties with other nations. And another key thing that any American government was going to need to do was have the authority to manage relationships with the natives. And so this new Articles of Confederation gave the national government the ability to do just that. Hey, are you worried about delivering something to somebody? Delivering mail, a package, something like that? Well, guess what? The Articles of Confederation, they have your back. They can make a post office, which was something we hadn't really done all the way yet. Ben Franklin kind of had it going, but it was kind of a private. Anyways, the new Articles of Confederation, post office, coming your way soon. And then one of the final powers of this Articles of Confederation government was that it could borrow money from other nations, even from its own states. It could also coin money, which means make like coins and specie, and put it into circulation for people to use to trade. So this new government was pretty powerful. Kind of. So those are the powers that this new government had. Now let's contrast those with the powers that they didn't have. All right, so like we said, this government was kind of a reactionary government. They didn't want this all-powerful king in charge of them, and for that reason, they didn't put an executive branch in this government whatsoever. There's no king, there's no president, there's no prime minister, there's nothing. In fact, the only thing there is a legislative branch. So like the legislative branch was the entire government, and each colony, or each state, I guess we should probably call them states now, each state could then send a delegate to the Confederation Congress to vote on things. Each state had one vote and only one vote, and in order to make any sort of decision, you had to get a supermajority, 9 out of 13, which anytime you get 13 people in a room, it's really easy to get them to agree on one thing. And that's called sarcasm, which is a device that lots of history teachers use to counteract the boringness of the topic or their poor teaching skills. I choose to use it for both. So yeah, not a lot could get done, and then if you wanted to amend the Articles of Confederation, you needed all 13 to agree on the amendment. Couple that with the fact that lots of states weren't even sending delegates to the Confederation Congress, and you get a government that was ineffective at best. And that's just how it was structured. Now let's talk about what it actually couldn't do. Poor Articles of Confederation. They get so much hate. I mean, again, you and your friends go set up a government, see how it goes. Yeah, probably not good. Maybe better than the one we have. No, that's not, don't say that. So key thing that the Articles of Confederation could not do was that it could not regulate trade between states, like state-to-state trade, so like Virginia to North Carolina. It couldn't regulate that trade. Those two states should be able to do whatever they want anyway, but whatever. And they also couldn't regulate trade between states and then other nations, which you look at that and you're like, that's not that big a deal. But if you think about it, that's a lot of lost revenue for this new government that probably doesn't have that much money anyway, because they couldn't tax anyone. They couldn't tax anyone. They couldn't tax anyone. We were so crazy with the representation and the taxation, the lack thereof, that we decided, no, this government's not going to be able to tax us at all. It's up to the states to do the taxing, which they did. But if you think about it, how does this government get any money? They don't, because they can't tax you, so they have no money. And that's probably the biggest shortcoming of the Articles of Confederation. However, they did get pretty creative, those guys in the Confederation Congress, and how they would raise money, and a lot of that had to do with a familiar place to us here at U.S. History with Mr. Peterson, and that's the Ohio River Valley. So the War for Independence ends in 1783, and we are now officially our own nation. And lots of European nations were kind of just waiting to see how we were going to do. Like, is this new country, the United States of America, are they even for real? A lot of them were waiting back in the wings. You can bet England was watching us, just waiting. Just waiting.
I've got a small query for you. What comes next? You've been freed. Do you know how hard it is to lead? You're on your own. Awesome. Wow. Do you have a clue what happens now? Oceans rise, empires fall. It's much harder when it's on your call. All alone across the sea. When your people say they hate you, don't come crawling back to me. Da 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 da.
I hope I don't have a copyright claim on this video now, but fair use maybe? Educational? I don't know. So the powers that be, the Confederation Congress, definitely had their backs against the wall when it came to this new nation that we kind of just created on the fly. So like we said, they had to raise money. The best way to do this? Sell some stuff. Yard sale style. What do we have a lot of laying around that people want and we could sell? Well, the government has land. That's right, the land from the Ohio River Valley, that coveted piece of land that we fought the French and Indian War over, and then we were told to stay out of it, so we fought the American War for Independence over it. That land now belongs to the federal government, the Articles of Confederation, the Confederation Congress, and since they have that land, they say, hey, let's go ahead and sell it to our people, make some money off the sales, and then allow our people to move into this. So after securing the land rights from the Native Americans, either through treaties or through a little bit of force or some mixture of the two, we eventually have all of this land in what becomes known as the Northwest Territory. The Northwest Territory contained land in the states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and then even a little bit of part of Minnesota. And this was called the Northwest Territory, mostly because it was northwest of, like, I don't know, half the colonies. Directions are hard when you don't have GPS, so maybe it just all seemed northwest to them. And so the Confederation Congress began to craft what became known in history as the Northwest Ordinances. There's two of them. One of them is 1785, the other one is 1787. 2 thumbs up for the Confederation Congress. The Articles of Confederation actually did something that had lasting effect. Let's go and look at it because the Articles of Confederation will be gone by the end of this episode. So the Northwest Ordinance of 1785 basically sold land in the Northwest Territory. And they did this by using what is known as the township system. So the township system was a little tricky, but they divided up the land in like a grid, 6 square miles. And then they divided those 6 square miles up into 36, I think, 36 square mile grids. Does that make sense? So, yeah, no, that makes sense. All right, 36 square mile grids, in each square mile 640 acres, and they had to sell it for at least $1 an acre. And then they would use the funds from the sale to fund the Confederation Congress. Then on top of that, they would also provide, like, one plot of the 36 would go straight to education, so you kind of get the beginnings of the American public education system, because you know Americans, we value our education. Or at least we did back then. I don't know, you're watching a video on YouTube. I mean, like, you could be watching Dude Perfect or something like that. So overall, the Northwest Ordinance of 1785 was a pretty solid deal. Way to go, Articles of Confederation. You did something. Look at you. Well, once people started buying this land and moving into this land, you have all these townships. You have lots of people moving into the Ohio River Valley because, again, it was a nice place to live. All right, lots of people want to be there. So the Confederation Congress lays out further rules to help us understand what's going to happen with this land. For this reason, and many others, we see the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 come into effect. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 provided a path to statehood for all of these different regions. Basically, you had to have so many free white males in an area, and then they could elect like a governor and some judges and all this other stuff. And really, the Northwest Ordinance actually became more of a Republican form of government than the Articles of Confederation had outlined for the rest of the country. It was kind of ironic. Once you had a population of, I believe it was 60,000 people or more, you could then apply for statehood. If your charter checked out with the Confederation Congress, they could vote. Remember, you only needed 9 out of the 13 to agree that you could be a state. And so many of the states entered the Union via the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Under the ordinance, the new states were granted the same standing as the old states. So there was no favoritism or power given to the original 13 colonies that became states. The new states had the same exact standing as the old ones. So that's cool. Probably the most lasting and enduring effect, and the one that would lead to the most conflict later on, was the fact that the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 prohibited slavery in any of the states that were settled in the Ohio River Valley in the Northwest Territory. And that's key because eventually the whole slave state and free state balance in the United States of America becomes a huge issue, but that's like 6 or 7 chapters from now. We'll get to that. So as you can see, the Articles of Confederation was able to get some lasting legislation into the picture and have a lasting effect on our nation. The whole not able to tax and enforce things on the actual states that make up the Confederation would prove to be a problem. In the next video, we're going to look at a key event that basically threw the whole Articles of Confederation, the whole Confederation Congress system out the window. So I hope you like this one. Stay tuned. We're going to have another one coming. Talk to you later. I'm not going to make any promises here, but hopefully in the future we won't have another long layoff in between one unit and the next, and we won't skip any more units. But one way that you can keep that from happening is by liking and subscribing to this channel, turning on notifications, because